It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the ViewSonic XG2703-GS. I've done a few of these video reviews in the past, and people generally really like the depth that I go into, but some people have also said that they do find the videos a little bit long. Obviously it's hard to go into a lot of depth without making the video quite long, but I'll at least try to not repeat myself as much as I have in the previous videos. So to start off, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the aesthetics of the monitor. I know this is always quite a divisive thing, especially on these gaming monitors where they've got various different coloured features. So you've got this G-Sync light green element there, like a lip under the bottom bezel. Also a cable tidy loop there, which is light green. And there's also actually a little light green lip at the top as well. From a normal viewing position, which is roughly shown on the camera at the moment, you can't actually see much of that green, and I don't find it quite as eye-catching as it does on some of the photos, especially the press shots. There's also green button labels just to keep with the Nvidia green theme there, and I'm not going to go through the menu system itself because that's done on a separate video. And the stand base has matte black plastic there and sort of shiny glossy matte plastic there. The bezels are single stage matte, that is to say there is no panel border. There's a tiny sliver of panel border at the top, pretty much nothing at the sides, so the bezel pretty much covers the whole panel border. The panel used is a 27-inch AHVA Advanced Hyper Viewing Angle panel with a 2560 by 1440 or WQHD resolution. This isn't to be confused with VA or vertical alignment because it's an IPS type panel. It's characteristically very similar to LG displays in-plane switching or Samsung's PLS plane to line switching. It can't simply be called IPS because that is a trademark of LG display, and this is an AU Optronics panel. I will get on to the viewing angle and image characteristics when I'm gaming in a little bit, and you'll see from my descriptions at least that it is very much an IPS type display. That resolution gives you a good amount of pixel real estate on the screen. It's a good amount of usable space as well. Everything's quite clear, quite detailed. It also means that for tasks like word processing and other productivity tasks, you get a good amount of usable space and the text clarity is good. Browsing the internet as well, quite a practical resolution for that as well. Most users will, as long as they've got at least reasonable eyesight, corrected or otherwise, they should find that they can quite easily use the monitor without using any sort of scaling. But we'll find that you get quite a lot of information on the page at the same time when you're browsing the internet, that kind of thing. And of course, if you're doing image processing, the pixel density is, I mean, it's not amazing by modern standards, but it's certainly decent. It's better than most Full HD models, of course, much better than 27-inch Full HD models. So the level of sort of overall clarity and detail for image processing is good, and also when gaming. Now, I'm just going to show you a little bit about the monitor aesthetically before moving on to the image performance in games. So, at the side of the monitor, you can see there are two USB 2 ports there. There's also a fully adjustable stand, and the fully adjustable stand does allow you to adjust the height of the screen. You can tilt it, you can pivot it and swivel it left and right as well. It's got a turntable mechanism at the base of the monitor. The stand is actually at its maximum height at the moment, which isn't as high as some monitors will go. It's not as high as the Dell S2716DG, for example. It doesn't offer as much height adjustment, and if you're a taller person, you know, much above 6 foot, say, quite an arbitrary number there, but you know, if you're a bit taller, you will perhaps find that you're slouching in your chair a bit, just because otherwise your head will be a bit sort of high in relation to the monitor. But you know, it gives you at least a decent amount of height adjustment. It's definitely better than non-adjustable stands in that respect. And of course, as I'll come on to in a little bit, I'll show you I'll show you now the rear of the monitor. The stand is actually attached. Obviously this is a photo of the rear of the monitor. I'm not actually turning it around, turning the monitor off just to show you this. So it actually attaches by 100 by 100 millimeter VESA, or VESA, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Again, you can see that cable tidy loop there, nice kind of green colour. On the photo it probably looks a bit lighter than it actually is in real life. But yes, it's a nice design at the rear of the stand as well. It's got a few little green features, not too much. It's another green feature it's got, I'll actually show you in real life, so to speak, is a little retractable headphone hook, and it has a little rubbery grippy surface on the top there, which is it's quite nice, and it's also a bit longer than some headphone hooks, so it can. I was going to get my headphones, but I don't know where I've put them. But anyway, I mean, even like big, thick gaming headphones, it's long enough to support them, which is nice. So the ports of the monitor are down firing. You'll find some of them on the left of the stand base neck, and some to the right. So the ones to the left of the stand base, as you're looking at the monitor from the rear, these are two USB 3.0 ports, USB 3 upstream, so they're USB 3 rather than USB 2 at the side of the monitor. There's a DC power input as well. The monitor has an external power brick. On the right side of the stand there are a few more ports. There's this, which is basically used by ViewSonic service centres. It's not something that users have to worry about. There's also a DisplayPort 1.2a input and an HDMI 1.4 input. For the full capability of the display, including G-Sync, you will need to be using the DisplayPort input. There's also a 3.5mm audio input or headphone jack there as well. So, without further ado, I will move on to a bit of gaming, and I'll talk about the image performance of the monitor. I'm now running Battlefield 4 on the map Operation Metro, which is a good test for contrast. It has lots of nice dark areas and bright areas combining, which is certainly good for discussing contrast. I also have it next to a Dell S2716DG, which I've put a bit higher than the ViewSonic, just so I can show you that the monitors like the Dell, which offer a bit more height adjustment, can go a bit higher than the ViewSonic can. So you've got an extra few centimetres at least, not a huge difference, but still a difference nonetheless. And just to avoid annoying people in terms of any OCD that might be going on, I will just adjust the monitor height so they're equal. I've now got the two monitors nicely lined up. What I'm not going to do here, I'm not going to show you sort of a side-by-side comparison all the time, because what you see depends on your own monitor, the processing that my camera's doing, what YouTube's doing as well. It's not an accurate reflection of what I actually see. All I'm really using this side-by-side comparison for is really my own benefit, to use it as a prop so I can go through certain viewing characteristics on this AHVA panel and then talk about it on this TN panel, because they're a bit different in that respect. So the first thing, sort of actually extending on from that, the written review of this monitor, there's a link to it in the description, is a lot more detailed, and I'm going to try and be sort of as brief as possible. I know I can waffle on a bit, but it's because I find this kind of thing really interesting, and hopefully some of you do as well. So I apologise in advance for that. But one thing is that the screen surface on the ViewSonic XG2703-GS is nice and light. It's actually the same as newer versions of the Dell S2716DG. It's light matte anti-glare, so it gives good vibrancy potential. It doesn't sap the vibrancy as much as stronger matte surfaces, and the surface texture is nice and smooth as well, so it means that light areas such as this light here and other bright areas, not necessarily just pure white or very light colours, but lighter colours, they're nice and smooth. They don't have this sort of mask of graininess, which is very nice not to have. Now, of course, people will be very interested in the contrast in terms of the reproduction of dark areas as well, very dark shades, and this Operation Metro is a good test for that as well. You'll probably instantly see if I just switch over to the TN model there and then go back to here, there's an obvious difference in the level of detail you can see straight away. Now, first thing I should mention, this model being IPS or IPS type, it does have IPS glow. You can see if I move the camera to certain angles, you can see that kind of sheen of glow which moves with the camera. From a normal viewing position, you are actually looking slightly down at the monitor, and you do see a bit of that glow towards the bottom corners in particular of the screen. On the TN panel, of course, it's TN, it doesn't have IPS glow. However, what you're seeing there, shown at the bottom of the TN model, is artificially enhanced by the fact that the perceived gamma is lower. On this, the perceived gamma is pretty much identical in the centre of the screen to what it is lower down and higher up the screen. On the TN model, even if you calibrate it perfectly, you have good gamma in the centre and an appropriate level of detail in dark areas such as this, whereas higher up the screen you get an increase in gamma, perceived gamma, so you can see that the level of detail is reduced. And you can see this from the camera, it's even clearer, I'd say, by eye. Then further down the screen, the perceived gamma decreases, and you're actually seeing sort of an artificially enhanced level of detail at the bottom. So yes, you don't get IPS glow, but it isn't as if things are just perfect and exactly how they should be on TN either. Now, moving on from that, backlight bleed. Now this is something that neither of my models here actually have a particular problem with. It's something of a lottery with any monitor, be it a Dell or the ViewSonic or others using similar panels. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm completely ignorant of the fact that some people do get models using this 144Hz AHVA panel that have obvious problems with backlight bleed. I'm fully aware of that. All I can really suggest to you is to get the model from somewhere with a good returns policy, such as Amazon, preferably using the link in our written review if you want to support our work. And if you do happen to get one with bad backlight bleed, then just send it back, ask for a replacement. Or you have to be a bit patient, obviously, I can appreciate that, but at least they're not going to put massive restocking fees on your head or charge you loads of money to do that. But it's not something that I'd worry about, and it's not something I'd let deter you from what is otherwise a very good monitor. Obviously, if you hate IPS glow or IPS type glow or HVA glow, whatever you want to call it, then the TN models may well be sort of the automatic better choice for you, because that doesn't change between models. You can have one without backlight bleed like I do here, but you're always going to have that glow. So I think I've probably whittled on enough about the contrast of these monitors. Enough, so I'll lighten the room up a bit and move on to the colour reproduction. So I've lightened the room up a bit. It's a nice bright day. Someone's taken advantage of that by mowing their grass outside, so I'm sorry if there's any annoying noise in the background. But I've managed to find this wasn't actually intentional, I just sort of chose a lighter map at random, and it just happens to be a map that shows nice big areas of individual shades, sort of lots of red shades, lots of green shades, sort of a mix of both. And that just happens to be a particularly good way of demonstrating some of the differences between these two models. And the first thing I'll mention on the ViewSonic XG2703-GS, it has a very nice gamma setup straight from the box. It also has a range of different gamma settings which you can adjust if you want to, and that means that there's absolutely no need to apply an ICC profile. they're not really meant for gaming. Obviously, if your model just for whatever reason doesn't have good central gamma with any sort of OSD settings that you're using, then you will perhaps want to use an ICC profile to improve things, which is certainly the case with this Dell. I mean, you can probably see the difference in saturation straight away, even in the middle. That's partly because this Dell has lower than ideal gamma, even centrally, and it does need an ICC profile to boost that, but I don't have it applied because I've got both the monitors running in clone mode at the moment. So this is just what the ViewSonic looks like out of the, well, not out of the box, but with out of the box gamma settings. There's no need to worry about ICC profiles. So that's a big massive tick for lots of people. The being an IPS type panel, the colour consistency is very good, the viewing angle performance is very good, so it's got good gamma performance. Sorry, the lawnmower outside is getting a little bit loud at the moment. But anyway, the central gamma is good, but because the colour consistency is good, perceived gamma is very similar at other parts of the screen as well. On the TN model, on the other hand, even if you calibrate it perfectly to have 2.2 gamma in the centre, perceived gamma does change. As I demonstrated with the contrast on Operation Metro earlier, the perceived gamma is lower down the screen, which means saturation levels are lower. Higher up the screen, it's higher, and saturation is stronger, shades look deeper. So, I mean, you can probably see if this sort of the different red and brown shades of that brickwork there. It doesn't really matter whether I'm viewing it at the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen or the middle of the screen. It looks more or less the same. On this monitor, it looks a lot more saturated, or significantly more saturated, higher up the screen than it does lower down the screen. Again, I'm not sure how well this comes across in the video, but there's a definite change. I'll just show you this one again. So, when people say, oh look, I'm looking at the monitor from directly in front, why do I care about viewing angles? Well, this is why you might care about viewing angles, because it does actually affect what you perceive even from a normal viewing position. But I mean, yes, you can argue that when you're playing fast-paced games you might not care about that kind of difference, which is fair enough, but some people do, and that's one area where the ViewSonic is a lot stronger. It also means that I mean, this isn't exactly the best demonstration of it because there's not exactly a huge range of green shades displayed here, but the fact that each shade is displayed consistently means that shades have their own sort of individual identity. So you might have some lighter green shades, darker green shades sort of intertwined, and whether you're looking at those shades at the bottom of the screen or further up the screen or the sides, wherever it is, they look more or less the same, and they have a distinct identity. Whereas on the TN model, some of those lighter green shades look even lighter at the bottom and darker at the top. It means you get shade crossover, so that closely matching shades, they kind of lose their identity. They might be darker higher up the screen, lighter lower down the screen, regardless of how light the shade is supposed to be. But I mean, to be honest, there's not an awful lot more I want to say about the colour reproduction. It's just it's just very good, well, excellent in fact on the ViewSonic. It's a massive tick for the ViewSonic there, and I definitely would recommend reading the review, which is linked to in the description, the written review, for a much more thorough analysis of that. But basically that's a real strength of this monitor, and hopefully I've been able to demonstrate some of the differences between this AHVA panel and this TN panel in that respect. I'm now going to move on to responsiveness. So I'm back on Battlefield 4 on a slightly different map, and you'll see that the Dell is no longer next to this screen. I mean, the main reason I've done that is because you absolutely cannot see on a YouTube video that runs at, I don't know, 50 frames a second, and my camera records at 50 frames a second, and the fact it's a static video, there are dozens of reasons why you cannot see what I'm seeing or what you would see when you look or use this monitor first hand or first person. It's a completely different experience. So this video is purely for me to sort of talk about the monitor really, and show you a few things. I couldn't show you the comparison between this and the Dell, and you wouldn't be able to, reliably say which is better or which is worse in different scenarios, blah blah blah. So the responsiveness of this monitor, it goes up to 165 Hz. You can see the frame rate is more or less 165. It fluctuates a little bit just based on this counter, but that's it's not super accurate, and it uses G-Sync, which I'll come on into a little bit. So there's a little bit of fluctuation there, but at this high frame rate on this monitor, it's a wonderfully connected experience. When I move my character with the mouse, I feel really sort of connected to the game world. I think that's the best way I can describe it. I mean, anyone who's actually used a decent high refresh rate monitor will know this feeling. I mean, sensitivity to that kind of thing does vary. Not everyone notices it as much as other people. But anyone who gives you some bullcrap story about your eye can only see 30 frames a second or whatever it may be, complete and utter rubbish. I'm actually, before I got into monitors, I did a biology degree. I know quite a lot about the human eye. I work with people in the Institute of Neuroscience now, and it's complete rubbish. The eye does not see in frames per second at all. So moving along from that, the 165 Hz experience is very good. As obviously it's not only the refresh rate and frame rate which makes this sort of connected experience so good, it's also the fact that this monitor has very little input lag. I basically measured next to no signal delay at all, and that's the element of input lag which you can feel. So it's really sort of a judge of how responsive the monitor might feel when you're using it. So these two things combine to make a very responsive feel as well. So in terms of how things look, which is the other aspect of responsiveness, to put it very broadly, I like to talk about something called perceived blur. And this is explained in quite some detail in a dedicated responsiveness article on the website. And it's also sort of summarised in the written review. So I'm not going to repeat too much of what is said there. I mean, it can get into some quite boring or potentially boring technical complexity. But essentially what you've got here is a monitor that's displaying, off the top of my head, I think it's 1.75 times, no, that doesn't make sense, sorry, it's 2.75 times as much information every second as a 60 Hz display. It's pumping out all of that information to you. And this is part of why it feels so responsive, but it's also why it looks so responsive. A lot of the blur you see on a sample and hold monitor, so that's like your typical LCD like this, which doesn't have or at the moment is not using a strobe backlight feature. Most of the perceived blur is down to the movement of your own eyes. It's not due to the pixel responsiveness of the monitor. That's another element which I'll come on to in a little bit. So the high refresh rate, it makes a big difference to the perceived blur. It hugely lowers it. I mean, that is provided, at least, the pixel responsiveness is adequate, basically. And on this monitor, the pixel responsiveness, I'm pleased to say, is certainly adequate. It makes a good use of the 165 Hz refresh rate. Now, I know people will look at the 1 millisecond response time of other models and the 4 millisecond response time of this one. I believe that's what they quote, or that's what they should specify. Yes, the AHVA, the IPS type panel, it's not as fast as the TN model. But, because most of the perceived blur comes from eye movement, that actually masks a lot of what the pixel responses are doing anyway, so that doesn't exactly matter, or doesn't matter as much as you think. It's not like the Dell is, 4 times as fast all the time, and it's going to give you a quarter of the perceived blur. It doesn't work like that at all. So, yep, perceived blur, very good. There are some weaknesses in pixel responsiveness. They're not big weaknesses, they are subtle weaknesses. So, particularly where there are lighter and darker shades combining, I can't really give you any particularly good examples in this scene here. Perhaps that text, for example, see that white text against the black background. and just general details, like you can see sort of like dark shadowy details here, the cracks in the rock and stuff like that. On the Dell, when you move quickly, those details are more distinct than they are on this monitor, but they're still pretty distinct on this. And when you compare it to any 60Hz display, even if it's a really fast TN panel, I mean, this completely blows it out of the water in terms of the perceived blur. So yes, the Dell does have a slight edge, but it's not a huge edge. And again, it's something I explore in a fair bit of detail in the written review, so I'm not going to whittle on too much more about that. But basically, this monitor makes good use of 165Hz refresh rate. Another aspect of this monitor which people will undoubtedly be very interested in is the fact that it supports Nvidia G-Sync with compatible Nvidia GPUs. This is a variable refresh rate technology, which means that the monitor can vary its refresh rate within certain margins so that it matches the frame rate outputted by the game. Now, with the settings I'm using at the moment, my frame rate generally matches 165Hz refresh rate anyway, so G-Sync doesn't get a chance to do its thing. But if I turn these settings up a bit, I might be able to talk a bit about what G-Sync can do for you or me. Right, so not exactly the best demonstration. It's hard to sort of balance the settings out and know what frame rate I'm going to get, but at any rate, you can see that the frame rate is fluctuating. You know, every now and then it dips a bit below 165, and without G-Sync, even those slight dips there, if you're using VSync, they cause the monitor they cause visible stuttering. It's quite a jarring thing. It completely interrupts the smooth flow of the gameplay of what you're seeing, and some users are really quite sensitive to this. I am, as one for one. If you've got VSync off, then you get tearing and sort of juddering as different parts of the screen are displaying different parts of the refresh cycle. It's not a pleasant experience. And again, I should stress, sensitivity to this does vary, but I know from talking to many users and research I've done that it is generally something that people find quite annoying. So not having tearing or stuttering or anything like that is very nice. So basically, if it wasn't for this frame rate counter, I couldn't tell that the frame rate was really dipping much below 165. Now, G-Sync is not a magic bullet. If I massively increase the... Okay, let's not go crazy. If I slightly increase the level of detail... Right, now hopefully that will kill my frame rate. Well, that's not exactly killed it, but you can see it's it's in the double digits now. It's under 100 frames a second. Again, without G-Sync, this would be stuttering, tearing like mad. With G-Sync, it doesn't do that at all. It's just sort of smooth and flowing gameplay. It can't get rid of stuttering caused by issues with the game engine or your memory running out or other things which aren't really related to mismatch between frame rate and refresh rate. It can't get rid of them, but it does a damn good job at otherwise. So you can see it's around 100 frames a second. Although it's sort of smooth, it's flowing, it's not interrupted by tearing or stuttering, you do notice more perceived blur compared to running at higher frame rates and higher refresh rates. And the connected feel, it's not quite as good, but definitely compared to a 60Hz monitor, it's very good. But G-Sync on this monitor actually goes all the way down to 30Hz. So it does its thing all the way down to 30Hz. And as the monitor goes below 30Hz, it uses some special compensation techniques so that it makes sure the frame rate will evenly divide into the refresh rate. So say it's running at 20 frames a second, the monitor will set its refresh rate to 40 Hz rather than just staying at 30 Hz, which again gets rid of tearing and stuttering. However, a thing I've really sort of explained in quite a bit of detail in the written review again, if you are getting really low frame rates, I've already said that at 100 Hertz, the 100 frames a second, the monitor's connected feel goes, it's a bit worse, and the perceived blur is increased. I mean, that increases hugely as the frame rate dips further. So it's about 50 frames a second here. Obviously, users of 60 Hertz monitors might be thinking, well, 50 frames a second is still pretty high anyway. But if you've got G-Sync off on this monitor, yep, tearing and stuttering like crazy. Even with G-Sync on, however, it doesn't have the same connected feel as you get with higher frame rates. It just isn't anywhere near as good, and the perceived blur is much, much greater. So, I mean, I'm probably preaching to the converted here. I think most of you hopefully will have read the review or will understand a bit about what G-Sync does already, but if not, the take home from this is basically it is a great technology, especially where the frame rate dips a bit, but it can't compensate for low frame rates. Low frame rates are still low frame rates, and you really, on a monitor like this, you want to really still be getting triple digits if you can, as high as possible. The monitor, just before I end this section, I should say the monitor also has a strobe backlight mode called ULMB, ultra low motion blur. Again, that's specific to Nvidia GPUs. Any GPU that supports G-Sync also supports ULMB. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate that or talk about this on the review, on the video review here, but it is explained and explored in the written review in quite some detail. All you'll see if I show you on the video is just a flickering mess. You won't be able to see any of the actual benefits of ULMB on this little static video. So I can appreciate that was a lot to take in, and although I tried to keep it as brief as I could, I do like to sort of witter on a bit, and I can appreciate that this has been quite a long video. So really, to wrap everything up, the ViewSonic XG2703-GS, it's really a very good all-around monitor. It is a very enjoyable monitor to game on. It offers some obvious strengths in colour reproduction compared to TN panel alternatives such as the Dell S2716DG. It also offers some advantages in sort of gamma consistency, which has advantages in terms of contrast in some ways, but in other ways it has disadvantages in terms of the contrast. Most noticeably IPS or AHVA glow. And again, I would like to stress that I'm aware that some other models using this panel, and perhaps other ViewSonic monitors using this panel, also suffer from a fair degree of backlight bleed. Now, that is to say that there's a sort of reasonable chance of getting one with a bit of backlight bleed, or in some cases quite a lot of backlight bleed. It's always a lottery with all LCDs, and the odds with monitors using this panel do seem sort of slightly skewed in a bad way. But again, I'd just like to repeat that if you do buy it from somewhere with a good returns policy, don't be put off. Use that returns policy if you have to. But there's a link in the description to the written review, and this has a link at the bottom of it which will allow you to purchase the monitor in a way that supports the hard work that I do and that others do on the website. So that would be very much appreciated. And I should also mention here that I'm aware in the US currently the monitor is exclusive to a retailer other than Amazon. However, it will certainly be coming to Amazon. I've spoken to ViewSonic about this, and indeed Amazon about this. The exclusive period, it's only going to be for a few months. I've actually been told that it's quite possible that in October, at some point, the monitor should be available on Amazon, and that's in the US and the UK. So, aside from the image performance, which is very good, the responsiveness is also very good. It's a touch less responsive in terms of pixel responsiveness than the Dell S2716DG. However, it doesn't have the same level of overshoot, inverse ghosting. I explore this in more depth in the written review than I really did here, but basically I didn't mention it on this review, the video review, because it's not actually something I see as a problem. I'm using the advanced setting. As long as you don't use the ultra fast setting, you really shouldn't have a problem with overshoot on this monitor. It's not a big issue. And yes, there's a little bit of trailing in places beyond what you get on the S2716DG, but the overall perceived blur is so much better than models with lower refresh rates, particularly 60Hz models. And despite having an IPS type panel, it's clearly a very responsive monitor. It also has very little input lag, so it feels very responsive to go with the nice high refresh rate and nice low perceived blur. The styling, I know that's not going to be to everyone's tastes. Again, I'd like to stress that when I'm actually using this monitor, I hardly even notice the light green elements. Yes, I can see the argument that says that it would be nicer if they just didn't bother putting that kind of thing on the monitor, because it can be a bit divisive. But I definitely remember that a lot of the press shots in particular make that look a bit more obvious than it is. You also get the nice solid fully adjustable stand. Not a huge range of inputs, but there are some USB ports and the essentials for connecting up both the computer to DisplayPort and also games consoles. There's an HDMI port as well, and the monitor has a full sort of scaling capabilities over HDMI. Obviously it's a 2560 by 1440 monitor, so it's not perfect at displaying full HD. I explore that more in the written review. So, I hope you've enjoyed this. I welcome any feedback in the comments section. I've been Adam for PC Monitors.